Welcome everybody back down to Ice Level. As always, I am your host, James Blennau. And this episode, saying it's important is a bit of an understatement. CHL players have just been granted eligibility to play in the NCAA Division I level. But before we get into our roundtable with my friends Dan and Lucas, let's go over what this rule actually means for college hockey. Now, the exact language that was used from College Hockey Inc. says the players will only be eligible, quote, provided that they did not receive above actual and necessary expenses to compete in the CHL. Now, what does this mean? Usually that contains travel, living situation, medical expenses, equipment, anything above and beyond what the player would need necessarily to play for that CHL club would put their eligibility in jeopardy. Now, I say this rule would also only apply to D1 programs because that is true. It would only apply to the programs at the Division I level. Division III programs, eligibility will still stay the same, and player recruiting will now open up across the Ontario, Western, and Quebec Maritimes junior hockey leagues. Now that we have the specifics out of the way, let's get right into our roundtable discussion. Joining me now are Lucas Jones and Dan Kay. My friends over at the Dan Kay Show have decided to graciously join me for this episode of Ice Level because, let's be honest, this is way too big for me to just cover by myself. Guys, it's great to be joining you tonight.
Hey, thank you, James.
Thank you, James.
Now, the impact of the CHL players' eligibility just simply cannot be overstated. You know, we already spoke about it on the Instagram Live. You guys are already speaking to junior hockey executives and creators from around North America about what's going on. But what's the most underspoken point that people are kind of saying? What are people missing about this?
Yeah, I think, James, first of all, when this first came out, right, people had seen the writing on the wall that this CHL announcement was coming at some point this year or next. I think the fact that it happened as early as it did certainly caught some folks off guard, caught some folks by surprise. Is you're in this time of year in October entering November where guys are just starting to get those commitments, right? They're just starting to find out about those scholarship offers from colleges at the D1 level. And this wrench gets thrown to the works. I think it caught some teams by surprise. It started to revoke some scholarships. That's been a big talk behind the scenes. But lately, as this has started to develop more and there's been time to marinate on it, the most recent development is a lot of the talk from the CHL of, are guys going to want to go to the NCAA? Are guys going to want to go to NCAA Division I hockey, or are they still going to attempt to go that pro path? That's going to be an interesting part of this story that's also developed.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point because do you want to go to school or do you just want to play hockey, right? I mean, for a lot of folks, like getting that education is important because not everyone makes it to the NHL. But I think the part that people might be missing is after the initial high-flying action, right, of like when the transfer portal first came through or when NIL money first came through, a lot of flash, but ultimately things calm down. And so I think what people might be missing is like the idea that eventually this is going to settle in and it'll be okay. It's not always going to be this chaotic.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of players that could actually end up taking that route. They may not want to take that route, but it may be more beneficial to them to take that route. You look at a player like Shane Wright, comes into the NHL super raw and absolutely just not ready for it, gets sent down to Coachella Valley, gets sent back to the CHL. The NCAA could have really benefited a guy like that. And do you think we'll see more guys of that sort of raw talent level coming over to the States?
Well, I think what you're talking about is kind of a double-edged sword there, right? It's the idea of, are we going to see the CHL continue to be used as that junior age model of development for the NHL? Or does the NCAA utilize this as an opportunity to go younger? And do they go younger so that those stories like Shane's happen all within the framework of collegiate hockey and collegiate athletics, where that person's also getting a degree? Or does the model stay the same, right? Does the NHL find the value is really in being able to move that player between two places where academics and book learning don't get in the way, right? And I think that's something that you've seen in certain sports. In the NBA, they went to that model of the 3-year guarantee, right? You had to go to school for 3 years. They wanted to go that route. Then they decided, never mind, let's make it one, right? And that's where we sit today, where you have to serve that 1 year in school or 1 year playing professionally somewhere before you can come in. Those those are going to be the questions. I think that's going to be your big question is, if the NCAA itself decides to start putting regulations to make players younger, to get away from the 20, 21-year-old freshmen, to start incentivizing younger athletes, actual freshman aged freshmen coming to college and playing Division I athletics, that's where this really starts to reshape the game. And it might negatively affect the CHL a bit, or may just leave the CHL untouched as no longer an avenue for players to come to the NCAA yet again. And that's where you go yet again to play pro hockey. There's so many levels to this sword right now that everyone's kind of getting through.
What's interesting is you look at the age of NCAA D1 freshmen for this season. Under 20% of the total player pool is 17, 18, and 19 years old, right? So where are they? They're in Canada. They're in the US. They're in different leagues. And I think to kind of what Dan's been getting at is there might be a market for younger players to get into the NCAA, but there is a jump between juniors of any level and NCAA hockey. But I would argue that there's an even bigger jump from NCAA hockey to AHL, NHL hockey, right? The NHL doesn't want young guys in their league, right? It's not the way that you sometimes see baseball and basketball wanting some younger guys despite that 3-year minimum. It's more like football. How many 18-year-old linebackers are in the NFL, right? How many 19, 20-year-old linemen are in the NFL? These physical contact sports, there is a benefit to guys being older, to guys developing, hitting 23, 24, 25, continuing to get stronger, continuing to put on size, continuing to develop. So I think where there's incentive for the NCAA to get younger, I don't know if it's going to shift entirely in that direction, because the only place left for them to go is the NHL, and they don't want a bunch of 19-year-olds skating around out there.
Yeah, I mean, it speaks to the changing of the game of hockey, though. You look at a team like Boston College, they're bringing in so many guys from the U.S. National Development Program. You know, I had a chance to talk to Nick Four about James Hagens and Cole Iserman, who's at BU, and they're two of the younger players on the NCAA front right now. You know, they come from the US NTDP under 18 program, and all of a sudden they're lighting up college hockey because we're seeing less and less physicality in the game of hockey and more speed. But the question is, how much and how quickly does that shift take place?
Yeah, and I think you look at it right now, the NCAA has a big question for itself. Is it an academic league, or does it want to be the most exceptional development league in hockey, right? And that's going to be its question of, are you taking these CHL players because you want to be an avenue for these players to now get degrees they weren't getting? Or do you want to be the avenue for the most exceptional talent to come play till the age of 24, 23 for guys that maybe fall through the CHL pipeline, don't make their way to the NHL, don't make their way to the AHL, and don't go play pro right away? These are questions that are up in the air right now. If I'm saying my perfect world for the NCAA, right, and I'm telling you a world that I think the NCAA Division I has to get itself to for the benefit of hockey, for the benefit of U.S. player development, I think the answer has to be that we get younger when you get to the NCAA. I think the answer has to be there has to be some incentivization of younger athletes coming into the game. I think those stories like you're talking about there at BU, I think you're talking about those guys from NTDP, that is the exact benefit of starting young in the development process, playing against high-level talent, right? You're seeing young players at NTDP get a chance to play against the best players from around Canada and the US at a younger age. And it's speeding up their development process. It's making them better, and it's making them viable at the NCAA game in Division One, which eventually makes them a great piece immediately to fit an NHL roster or AHL roster at the professional level. That's where we have to get to. Right now, we sit in a world where it looks like the NCAA might get better, more talented, but just older too. It's not going to change anything to the development model. And the problem is with that log jam of spots at the top now, and more people than ever at a high exceptional level being able to go to the NCAA, does that stifle those guys at the bottom of the barrel that can develop and become the Steve Alexis of the world, someone we've worked with, Lucas, who I jokingly always talk about, it's my bud. We are friends, but we're close professional colleagues there. And Steve Alexis is a guy who wound up playing some club hockey and wound up winning a Stanley Cup with Sidney Crosby. Those stories are gone if it's just the NCAA changes nothing but allowing CHL players in. Because eventually, year one, you'll have a lot of CHL guys that go, I don't want to go to college. This is why I went this route. I want to play professionally, right? But as time goes on, those guys that were going to the USHL because they wanted to go to college, those stories will start to change. They'll go play in a CHL in front of big crowds with big money behind it. They'll get those deals that are non-exceptional pay, right? Non-excessive pay. And then they'll make their move to the NCAA. So it's just for the development sake of the game, the NCAA here, you hope goes younger, Lucas. That's at least my take.
Yeah, I think the one issue that you say the word logjam, and I think that's that's kind of the best way to look at it, because whatever change happens, that's why it's not going to be all crazy forever, right? Because eventually what's going to happen is you're going to have these really talented young players coming up against these very talented and much stronger and much smarter and more developed older players. That's going to take some time to filter out. My worry, I think, as Dan, as you brought up, using the example of your close personal friend, Steve Alexi, is that what you lose, or I should say what ends up happening, is I think what a lot of parents, Dan, have talked to us about over the last 10 years of us working in junior hockey. If my son doesn't get into the right AAA program at 10, my son doesn't get on the right travel team at 12, if my son's not playing in the right junior league at 15, is his career over? And we've always been able to say no, right? Like, there's always time for development. There's always time to move things in the right direction, get bigger, stronger, faster. The worry, if the NCAA overcorrects and goes young, is that answer, unfortunately, becomes maybe, right? Maybe if they don't get that development super early, maybe there isn't as much of a shot for them anymore. Not to say that you can't continue to develop and be seen, but if there's too much of the overcorrection, I fear that you lose some great talent in the shuffle simply because you're looking for a birth year rather than a player.
Yeah, I mean, and you talk about getting younger. Both of you have been saying, like, the process of development needs to and will be speeding up significantly. And we're already seeing it. I talked about the series of games against CHL teams that the US NTDP is playing. I think this is just going to be the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure you guys have done your research on USHL teams looking to join the CHL and things like that. But what could really happen is, given the the cross-border presence of the game of hockey, we might start seeing more and more 19 and 20-year-olds border hopping to play.
Yeah, and I think junior hockey for so long has been a war zone. Whether that war zone has been USA Hockey versus some of these unsanctioned leagues now, right? Or Hockey Canada against their unsanctioned leagues now. Or even those sanctioned USA and Hockey Canada leagues not always getting along, not always jiving in their belief of what the next steps are, the right process is to do everything. Hockey is in a place for the first time in a long time, probably over a decade, where there could be that come together moment, right? Where you actually look at the development process in this game and you clean it up. I think a world where tier one hockey is tier one hockey, and the USHL and those major Canadian teams up there in the CHL are working together to get the right age ranges in the right places, right? Working together to make the game better. That starts to trickle down and help in this situation. It helps the NAHL, right? The NAHL tier two, which is going to be some of your back end Division One guys now. A lot of your best Division Three players going to the NCAA. Then you look down at the tier three level and you start to be able to regionalize more, right? Instead of these major conglomerates growing around the country, you start to localize and centralize. And if you can do that, if everyone can come together and start to really work up the ladder, you build the game from the bottom. Lucas, you don't lose those stories that you talk about, those parents aren't as worried about, oh my gosh, my kid's in the wrong program at 10 years old. They're never going to play at BU or BC. They're never going to make the NTDP team. And you start to say, there's a place for everybody to develop at the pace they develop, and they're still not out of the game. I'm not calling for every single NCAA Division I player to be 18, but I am saying there should be some incentivizing to that process, right? And I also look at, we talked about all scholarships last time I was on with you, James, right? We talked about that the new scholarship rules. And you look back, and I think that with this move, maybe you can find some reform in that world of scholarships, right? Where you go back to what the old football model used to be. The old football model had a professor, Alan Sack, at the University of New Haven. And he talked about when he played for Ara Parsegian, he went to Notre Dame to be a quarterback, okay, back in the old NCAA days. And he was terrible. He said they recruited me and they did a bad job. They gave me a scholarship and I was not good enough to play quarterback at Notre Dame. Ara Parsegian couldn't get rid of him, though. Back then, you had a scholarship, and unless the player left the school on his own accord, they kept that scholarship for 4 years. And you had X amount of scholarships every 4 years to use. If you screwed up, you screwed up, right? I think that would help with the transfer portal. I think that would help with what age you're bringing these guys in at. And I think it would incentivize better recruiting practices. Alan Sack's story, he got put on the defensive side of the ball because he couldn't throw it, winds up winning a Super Bowl ring as a defensive end with the Los Angeles Rams, right? He was developed. The school was forced to develop him. They were forced to allow him to get his education because they promised that scholarship. It protects the players, it protects the schools, and it makes everyone have to be better at their jobs. So I think that this is something that if you're going to make these wholesale changes, then let's make these wholesale changes. Let's not just throw things at the fire and see what puts it out. So I think the CHL move's great. I think the scholarship move is on the right track, but I think there are these little tweaks we can make along the way to make the game a little bit better.
One thing along those lines that is interesting is, and I'm going to not contradict myself a little bit, but maybe take an adjacent angle of attack, is I think it in the way that the trickle down will help tier 2, if tier 2 can refocus a little bit and focus more on the, like you said, the bottom end D1, D3 area. Where does that leave tier 3, right? And I think where it leaves tier 3 is they have to look in the mirror a little bit, right? Tier 3 pay to play hockey is going to probably end up being very back end D3, ACHA, various club levels of hockey. I don't think that's a bad thing, though. I think a lot of tier 3 owners are going to have to look at what the program can do realistically when recruiting players, what kind of players they're recruiting, and become more focused on development. I know, we've often advocated for having, leagues split into pure development and pure competitive models. We've advocated for things like relegation in that world for a while, where you have one section of a league that is purely focused on development and not focused on winning a championship, and another part that is competitive. And I think that maybe this will finally force some tier 3 leagues to kind of go, okay, if we're only really able to recruit players that because of the additional talent coming in, now our players are now kind of more of the back end D3 ACHA, what do we tell these guys? How do we work on these guys? How do we give them their money's worth? And the good operators will stick around. And I think maybe one unintended consequence is maybe it cleans up that tier 3 level a little bit. Get some of those bad operators out of there simply because of the free market. It could be interesting, but unintended.
Yeah, I mean, we talk so much about the trickle down, and Lucas, I know you love the topic of expansion with your beloved Rutgers hockey team, but I think the expansion of the NCAA would also be the biggest thing to help the junior leagues. You know, it would help a lot of these leagues be able to develop more players who can go out and go play for like a fully sanctioned collegiate league and not just, you know, something that's not really considered club by the players, but really, for all it's worth, it is club.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing right now is how much do you care is the question to the folks at USA Hockey, because there's money that comes in every year that is utilized to grow the game at the development level, right? And that money is allocated to a few different places each year, whether at the junior level, the youth level, to help develop and grow this game. To me, that money for at least this upcoming year or two needs to be allocated to a place at the NCAA level for the first time ever to help stimulate growth in that game. There should be money allotted to these schools to help them grow this game, because you have to remember Title IX, right? You have to remember the need to balance an athletic department. You can't just add a women's hockey team into your athletic department on a whim. You can't just do the same on the men's side of the game. You have to balance that participation. You have to find a way to do so. And what does that take? That takes funds, right? Most athletic departments in the country, it's a great project for college students out there. Go check out how many athletic departments are actually making money at the end of the year and turning a profit from their sports programs. It's not many, right? So you look at how do they fund it? How do you incentivize a school to say, yes, I want to take this on, I want to grow this game? And how do you push for this to happen? That to me is where USA Hockey comes into play. That to me is how they control the narrative here as the CHL starts to fill the ranks of college hockey, and they continue to protect the American hockey players here and the Europeans that have come to America to develop their game, that want to go play NCAA Division One, NCAA Division Three hockey. There is no reason why the University of Kentucky, who puts 2,500 in the seats for midnight puck drops, cannot play Division One hockey. Same for Louisville, who does 1,000 to 2,000 a game when they've got big matchups there. There's no reason why you shouldn't see USC playing UCLA between the Staples Center and the new building out there in LA, right? There's no reason why these things can't happen. The University of Georgia just had a new building built there that they fill up each and every year for hockey. NC State did an outdoor game to over 10,000. There is plenty of room to grow this game. There's plenty of ability, but it is difficult for athletic departments. I know we all pay high tuitions in college. I know we all pay a lot of money. I know we see Nick Saban's paycheck at the end of the year and we go, wow, Alabama football is making a lot. But it still costs a lot of money for these institutions to add athletic teams. It needs to be subsidized and helped out, and it needs to happen now so the game can grow. And if you do that, this is the best thing to ever happen at every level of the game.
I mean, it does come down to money, right? In the 22-23 fiscal year, the NCAA brought $1.3 billion worth of revenue. 1.3 billion.
I saw zero of it.
and you didn't see a gosh darn penny, Dan, for the work you've put in to develop the NCAA. Yeah, 1.3 billion, and that's up from the previous year by about $150 million. So revenues are growing. They're only going to grow as football grows, as basketball grows, as hockey grows, and as those revenues grow. And once the NCAA gets rid of a handful of antitrust lawsuits and potentially pending class action because of the recent House versus NCAA case, that's as they say in the business, that's free real estate, right? That's money that could then be used to jumpstart some of these programs. And as we see, literally from a year, as the NCAA grows, the revenues grow. You have to spend money to make money. Owners don't want to hear the first part of that. The rich guys don't want to hear the spend money part. They want to hear the make money part, but those two things are inextricably linked. Like, that is it. So I think for the NCAA, they obviously have some legal challenges that are still on their plate, but there's certainly money in the banana stand to grow hockey. And as we see, it only leads to more money coming in, and that's called it's called a cycle, right? Money in, money out. It all keeps growing.
As my good friend Mac from Sunny in Philadelphia always says, the money keeps moving in a circle. But don't take that scene out of or in context at least, because that's him talking about how he doesn't understand how the economy works, which is standard communication student practice.
Yeah, 100%. I have certainly had the same take on the economy before. Do not look to NK to be your economist, but I can tell you this much: if you're asking about hockey at the NCAA level or at the junior hockey level, I can certainly help a bit there, right? And James, I think as we look throughout these next couple of weeks and months, I think the exciting part for fans and the folks that listen to your show, right, talking about this at the NCAA Division 1 level, when you look at it from that microscope, my gosh, like the game is going to be better than ever, right? That you're not going to miss any talent anymore at the NCAA Division 1 level. Everyone who can play there will play there, and I think this will only benefit what the game looks like at that level. Can the NCAA Division 1 media entities and arms really get behind this and push this game now and show how good it's going to get? I hope so, right? Because in the past, I think that's one thing that the NCAA Division 1 level of hockey has really struggled with is how does it get its message out there? How do you get people to watch the game? Everybody's eyes are on the Frozen Four, but nobody watches anything else unless they're Dan and Lucas and James, right? They're not as locked in on this thing. So that'll be interesting to see as well. Can the media keep up with this move? Can they really showcase what the difference is, and can they show just how good the game is getting at that level?
And James, I think you see that, right, with some of your coverage. So you're based at Quinnipiac, right? So you are in the traditional hotbed of hockey. And I'm sure you see that when it's time to go leave that hotbed and try to find reporting, right, on some of these other conferences and some of these other schools, not just west of the Mississippi, but west of the now I can't think. I was going to do really cool and drop a super cool river reference in Massachusetts, but I blanked on the name of the river, so it's less cool. But anything west of Massachusetts, essentially, it's really hard to find. It's really hard to find those legacy reporting, the legacy media that covers some of these non-traditional areas. So it is certainly on the media as well to, like you say, Dan, to care about this stuff, to show people why it's important, as opposed to just tuning in 3 weeks before the Frozen Four. And I think what we're really all talking about, kind of circling around and hitting all the different points, is expansion of every facet of the game. The NCAA has to grow. The amount of teams has to grow. The regions, the media, the reporting, everything's got to grow. And it comes back to making the investment, because it all has to grow together. If you expand and you yell in a forest and no one's around to hear it, then who's going to know, right? But if you invest money in media and television and there's nothing new to show for it, no one's going to watch. So unfortunately, it has to kind of all grow at the same time here. But it would be silly to waste this opportunity for growth that the NCAA has provided for us.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason I always sign off my episodes saying we're going to grow this game together, because that's the only way we're going to do it. And, there is a certain level of media that's around. You have your USCHOs, your CHNs, all the people that I had on the season previews. There's people out there that are working hard to cover these teams, but there's just not enough coverage on the national level. People are out there. People are spreading the good word, the gospel of college hockey, if you would. It's unlike anything you've ever seen out there. It's the NFL crossed with NCAA football. You got student sections that have choreographed dances and like bands and striped sweaters.
Yep.
There's nothing like it. When I first visited my first college hockey game, I'm gonna go on a little patented James Blennau tangent here. I went to my first hockey game in 2021 at the Pagula Ice Arena in Penn State. And I was walking to my tour and I saw the billboard with my dad. And I'm like, oh, we should go to that. And we walked in there and he was like, This is like a mini Nassau Coliseum. It was 4,600 seats with just one of the best environments in all of hockey. And I was like, you know what? I need to start watching this. And the rest is sort of history. And that sort of outreach needs to expand. The outreach from the national media. We saw a lot of it after the Quinnipiac National Championship. Zubin on ESPN was interviewing Rand Pecknold, but Dan, as you say, outside the Frozen Four, nobody really cares. So, to
Yeah,
all
and
my
I don't think
friends
it's a,
out there, sorry.
but I don't think it's a lack of care, right? I think it's a lack of ability to see guys like yourself as often, right? And I think if media can embrace the shows like yours, James, and like the others that you referenced, and the work that these folks are doing, if they can get you guys on a bigger platform, which we try to do here as well, that's the future of the game, man. It's coming. It's coming. I remember when they told me Penn State shouldn't have a team. They said that. They said, "What do you mean Penn State's going to have Division One hockey? That's a bad idea. That's a weird market for it. It can't work there." And look at it today. You just went to Pagula in 2021 and you said you loved it. I'm telling you, man, people tell you they can't play hockey in Florida or Georgia or all these other places. You can do it. 100% do it.
Well, I mean, they still can't count shots on goal right at Penn State. They're still working on getting those numbers to be correct. But
it's enough with the negatives.
Listen, it's not that I modded my PlayStation controller with a scarlet backing on it to better play NCAA Football 25 or anything. But yeah, no, I think there is a lot of passion. I mean, hockey is a sport that runs on passion, right? Dan, you and I kind of have fallen victim to that working on passion mentality for more than a couple of times, right? Where we're willing to push past quite a bit because of the passion we have for the sport. And there's dozens of us out there, right? So like you said, it's about getting the platform. But I think the other thing too about the way that hockey gets covered is the shift from the D1 mentality. And this was something we kind of touched on when we did that Instagram live a little bit. But this might also be helpful to consider is that right now it's D1 or bust for a lot of families, right? These borderline D1 players, the actual D1 players, they think I got to go D1. That's the only, I got to go. As more talent enters the pool, D1 gets better, but that means D3 gets better. That's the other side of the trickle down, right? And that means that the reputation of D3 gets better because the talent is better. That means the reputation of ACHA and club gets better. That means that the whole thing, so now you don't have to just play D1 to play great college hockey. You're going to be, the NHL scouts are going to be looking at people in D3 a little bit more often. Because just because you have a player who's playing D1 yesterday and is playing D3 tomorrow, doesn't mean the player's changed. It just means that the what's around the player has changed. But the fundamentals of that player are still there. So now NHL scouts have an even broader pool to pick from, which means that players have an even broader pool to attend. So again, I think as much as there are negatives, there can be positives.
Lucas, well spoken as always, despite your lateness that I wanted Dan K to call out in this episode.
He was late today, folks, and this is just a classic Lucas power move. He's very used to being the Zoom master where he makes the Zooms.
I even made a Zoom for tonight.
Yeah, he wanted to try to take control of James's Zoom, and James did exactly what he's supposed to do. It made his own Zoom room, his own recording, and Lucas decided to big league him and show up late. So thanks, Lucas, for that, but I always show up on time with my duck hat on.
In the words of Metallica, master of puppets, I'm pulling your strings.
As soon as I saw and also he has a much fancier Zoom than I do. He has a Quinnipiac Zoom. I only have the regular generic old man Zoom that's not attached to a college because I graduated a decade ago. So he's even flexing on me there.
Oh God, my study room lights.
And oh, there we go.
His lights. Ooh.
Oh boy.
Ooh,
Lucas is shutting the lights off on him now.
That's why they call me the tech director, James. Don't mess with me.
We might have to keep that in the episode.
I think you have to now.
I think we have to, but with that might be a sign from the Quinnipiac facilities who still haven't fixed the elevator after 3 days. We'll just get that out of the way because I've been climbing up 5 sets of stairs every single day.
Keep that in the episode too. We'll tag Quinnipiac in it.
Yeah. So please call the elevator maintenance company. That elevator right out there. For the love of God, I'm on the ninth floor. Like, even though it's only fourth to ninth floor, like, come on, we're paying how much in tuition? Let's get this done.
And that
And
is
we
a
want to add
metaphor.
hockey teams.
Yeah, I know. I've
can't even get
never
the
seen
elevators.
the arenas right out the window from this study room. You can literally look at the flags in the front of the arena. You can look at the hockey side of the barn. And like that elevator, I guarantee you is never broken.
No, it's probably one of the good ones too. Like that doesn't like kind of jump when it takes off from the ground floor. It's probably nice and smooth,
It's a little
counterbalanced.
bit slow because it only goes through 3 floors. You got the basement, the catacombs of the arena, as I like to call it. You got the main concourse, and you got the university club for all the big wigs.
All right. Well, NCAA hockey, two priorities. Number one, fix James's elevator. Number
Number
two,
one.
That's not even NCAA hockey. That's just
I mean, they can get involved.
they've got
They
enough
know what
money
they
to get
did.
involved.
it's just the college part of it. It's not even the national, the athletics, or the association.
First, fix James's elevator. Second, build D1 and D3 hockey across the country. Two very
do it.
easy tasks to complete.
Yeah. Build the mid majors. Also build D2.
There's a whole other division in there.
Yeah.
That's a whole other podcast. I feel like, especially with the three of us on here, is
We could
what
go for
comes next for
hours on
D2.
D2 hockey. But since you guys don't want to listen to us ramble on for probably longer than this at this point, since I've gotten so off topic in the last 15 minutes, that's going to be it for our round table. Guys, thanks so much for joining.
Hey, thanks for having us, James.
Yeah, thank you, James. Anytime. The Ice Level Podcast is sponsored by Best Damn Tape. Best Damn Tape's mission is to supply the most affordable and elite level sports tape to athletes worldwide. You can go to bestdamntape.com and use code DanKShow40. That's DanKShow40 to get 40% off your order. Go to bestdamntape.com and order your clear tape, your black and white tape, scented stick wax, and more.
And that's all we've got for this episode of Ice Level. Thank you, everyone, again so much for joining me. Thank you to College Hockey Inc. for providing so much of the information about how the rules apply to recruit and eligible players. Thank you to Lucas Jones and Dan Kay for coming on. Make sure to check out all of their content surrounding the rules and the impact on junior hockey. They'll have a ton of content coming out over the next few weeks and even months, talking to people from all across the hockey world, across North America. But as for me, I've been James Blennau. I'm not an expert, but neither are you. And in order to grow this game, we're going to grow it together. I'll see you next time on Ice Level.